Thank you, Lord. Bless your name, Jesus. Thank you, Father. Wonderful counselor, mighty God, Prince of Peace, everlasting Father. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. So, I would like to say good morning to everyone and welcome to Daring Dialogues, where I am your host, Shantae Charles. I am glad that you have chosen to join us for this season of Daring Dialogues. If you've been with me any number of months and days, you know that we are on our fourth season. And so if you are with me for the first time, if you are tuning in, I want to say welcome to you. Good morning to the We Dare Squad, those of you who have been consistent and continuous supporters of what I do here at Daring Dialogues. So, for those of you who are new, I do have a couple of things I want to share as we begin today so you'll know how Daring Dialogues flows and you can tune in as you so desire. So the first thing you need to know about Daring Dialogues is it is a outreach or a branch of my larger company, which is God Ideas. It is the media arm of God Ideas, the vlogging arm, the video blogging arm of God Ideas. It's where I share current events, where we do book read alouds, and where we talk about what is important to us as a society and particularly what is important to us as a people. I'm talking about Black people. Yes, I am. And then also, we talk about what is important to us concerning our faith beliefs. So, Daring Dialogues consists of 100 episodes. So, we are at the beginning, we are starting a new season. So, if you want to keep up with us, just know we're going to be here for 100 episodes, and we're going to be here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Most of my regular viewers already know that if I can't make it at 11 a.m., I will try to give you as much heads up as I can, or we'll come back and do an evening broadcast. But those who are We Dare Squad, you can give me some thumbs up if I've been pretty good about that for every season coming on and not just disappearing on my viewers. So, Monday through Friday, Mondays we're going to talk motivation. So, that'll be things that have to do with you as a person, as a human being, encouragement on your Mondays. Then we move to Teachable Tuesdays. Teachable Tuesdays is history. Mainly, we cover history, Black history, things that are happening in our society that we can learn from. And today we're covering relationships, Relationship Wednesday. We've been in a book about dating, which we're going to continue today. And also the book 11, where we're talking about indispensable relationships that you cannot be without. We're talking about relationships in general. So those of you who have been keeping up with our reading in that book, we are shifting that book from Monday to Wednesday. So we're going to open it up today. Thinking Thursdays has to do with theology and philosophy. So if you are big into theology or philosophy, church history, etc., join us on Thursdays. And lastly, Fridays is Finance Friday, where we cover health and finances, things to make you healthy, wealthy, and wiser. So if you are into finance, you're into health topics, keeping your body in shape and together, making sure that your body can go the distance for your purpose, you can join us on Fridays. And of course, most people show up Monday through Friday because we cover something different every single day. All right. Places that you can follow me, and you can screenshot this if you so desire. You can follow me on Twitter, IG, and YouTube at ChurchLove333. That's my handle. On Facebook, you can find my pages, Life Nation and Daring Dialogues. And then I do have a special offer for the first 5 people who will email me who are new to the broadcast. So if you email me at reachshante@gmail.com and let me know that you are new to the broadcast, I have something for you. And then if you would like to join the We Dare Squad to give a gift of support, you can follow the instructions there at my PayPal, paypal.me/Life Nation. All right. All I have to say about that is I am good ground. We know that the seed is the word, and if you would like to support what we do here, you can utilize and support us through the paypal.me link. All right, so about me personally, good morning, Lady Judy. I'm going to say my individual good mornings in just a moment. About me personally, I am an author of the popular series Church Love, and this is actually book 2. So when people say they are an author, a published author, I am that. As you can see, this is not a pamphlet. This is not 60 pages. Okay? It's a book, a real one. All right? Feel free to order them. They are on Amazon.com. If you want to get your whole love life together, if you want to get your whole relationship life snatched, you can order this series, Church Love Novels, on Amazon.com, Barnes and Nobles, Books A Million, wherever books are sold. And this is actually published under my company. See that logo there? That's God Ideas. All right. Also, I am a music artist, CD Baby, Shante Charles. You can look me up there. Also available wherever music is sold, Google Play, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. All right, and the name of the album is Heartbeats and Hot Coals. If you're a gospel lover, if you're a jazz lover, I've got a little bit of everything on this particular album, and I encourage you to check it out. All right, now let's get into the reading. We're going to be looking at Labor of Love. If you want to know about the history of dating, that's what we're on talking about on Wednesdays. The invention of dating. I'm still seeing Christians and believers, especially leaders, I'm still seeing people push the concept of dating. So that's why we're still in this book, because I need people to understand where dating comes from and why it may not be compatible to your life as a believer. All right? I understand that people want to remake the concept of dating for believers, but this book details the history behind it and why it may not be compatible for your life. All right? So right now we're on the section called Going Steady. And then we're going to continue after that into the book 11. And we're talking about relationships that you cannot do without. And today we're talking about who is your Timothy. Who is your Timothy? You need a protege. It's going to be good. So I want to say good morning to Lady Barbara, Pastor Ben, Lady Latoya, those of you who are watching by live streams, wherever you're watching, whether you're watching on a laptop or your iPhone or your smartphone, whether you're watching through Twitter and other various means, I want to say good morning to you as we get started in our reading today. So, going steady. Listen to these numbers. By 1956, there were 13 million teens with an average income of about $10.55 a week. Now, most people today are upset because they can't get $15 an hour. But these teenagers were only making $10.55 a week, so you can just imagine how much inflation has taken place. 15 years earlier, that amount would have represented the total disposable income of an average family. And children who worked outside their homes would have been expected to hand over their earnings to their parents. But kids who came of age during the Eisenhower presidency had no memory of the Great Depression and a little inclination to save their money. Together, they spent more than $7 billion per year. companies began to fall over themselves to cater to the tastes of teenagers. Novelties like mass market paperbacks, recorded singles, and cheap transistor radios allowed teens to live increasingly on their own wavelength apart from their parents' thoughts and views. In order to continue growing, companies created products targeting younger and younger buyers. Take the training bra. Through the 1940s, young girls had usually worn undershirts until their breasts were developed enough to warrant a bra. But at the end of the decade, Maidenform and other lingerie companies began marketing bralettes or booby bras to girls as young as 9 or 10. Experts reassured parents that going steady was simply like wearing a training relationship. If the privileged students of the 1920s and 30s had made dating a respectable activity, it was the steadies of the 1950s who made it middle class. In their world, dating no longer involved the competition of a selling floor or a stag line. It was based on a promise of mass production and mass consumption in which everyone was able to partake. The wealthy fussers and popular daughters of the 1920s and 30s had vied with one another to rate as many dates as they could. However, by the 1950s, many more young people could afford to go out dancing or go out for burgers or to the movies. And so, the battle for survival of the fittest that had dominated fraternity dance floors gave way to a kind of romantic full employment. So, as we said earlier, dating was the thing at first, and then now time has transitioned from people just dating, which is supposed to be a one-time event most of the time, to going steady. All right, and she calls it full-time employment in the romance department. Democratized dating was one of the many fruits of the booming economy. If everyone was going to enjoy it, then that means that six boys could not fight to cut in on a single girl. They all had to pair off. We can see how closely steady dating was tied to the new culture of consumerism by how often authorities compared dating to shopping. By the 1950s, shopping had become the go-to metaphor to explain courtship. In his popular textbook, Modern Courtship and Marriage, the family expert E. Lemasters wrote, quote, "Random dating can be best compared to American shopping practices." He likened the casual dating of the college man and co-ed era to window shopping. The couple take a superficial look at each other with no obligation to buy. In 1968, the psychologist Tom McGinnis argued in his work, A Girl's Guide to Dating and Going Steady, that going steady could be a good way to try on partners. Deciding what kind of marriage you want is something like choosing a dress in a store, he wrote. The fact that only one dress seems right for you out of perhaps 100 that you look at does not mean that the 99 others are poorly made or in horrible taste. They just are not for you. Few Americans are likely to remember Lemasters or McGinnis now, but I bet you know the advice that Smokey Robinson handed down from his mother, which was, you better shop around. Shop, the miracles chirp behind them, shop around. When I think about it, every single one of the Motown hits that have been etched in my memory since childhood is about this idea of serial monogamy or going steady. They all evoke the ecstasy of falling hard for someone, the agony of losing them, the excitement of starting the process all over again. The Temptations topped the charts with My Girl, and the Four Tops did the same with Sugar Pie Honey Bunch, right? Both songs opened the swells of infectious celebration. Diana Ross and the Supremes tended to sing about the sad parts, like Where Did Our Love Go? They plead in the song of that title. Stop, in the Name of Love, gives a faithless man and says that he should stay. Baby Love laments the pain of breaking up. But even when mourning, Motown hits sounded joyful. Same Old Song evokes the sense of emptiness that follows losing a lover in a doggedly bright key. The soaring scales of the Jackson 5 made being desperate to get back with an ex sound irresistibly fun. No wonder these became the anthems of the steady era. They were like advertisements for dating patterns. Motown hits captured the power of exclusive passion, followed by a healthy breakup. For the millions of teens who heard them, their rhymes and rhythms must have reinforced the sense that breaking up and then making up was just the way things went. With their cheap radios and phonographs and the money to buy records, teens developed listening patterns that followed the same cadence. You went out, you bought your favorite music, and then listened to it to death. Once you got sick of it, you went out and you bought another. You fell in love with the purchases, you spent time with them, and then parted ways. Later, you recalled them fondly. This model of cyclical consumption is a very particular kind of shopping around. And in the 1950s, it was new. It too was invented in Detroit. Now, if you think about what she just said and the power of what she just said, she said that music oftentimes was tied to the patterns of relationships that people engaged in. So I want you to think about that for those of you who have grown up in the 90s and now into the 2000s, right? We've gone from music like Can You Stand the Rain to Smack That, Flip That, Toss That, swiping credit cards through people's body parts, right? So we've gone from music that celebrates and honors a love relationship to now we've gone to music that teenagers are listening to that objectifies women, right? That objectifies the relationship, that is oftentimes abusive, okay? So you have to take a look at what are people ingesting music-wise and how are those themes playing into how they carry themselves in a relationship. All right? So some of the music out here is actually pretty violent towards women. Some of it talks about beating up women, raping them, drugging them. So if that's the kind of music that is being pumped into the next generation, then you have to think about what does that look like in terms of their relationships now. All right? And so we really do have to think about that. I want you to think about that as we continue this talk. It is not clear who coined the phrase dynamic obsolescence. In the 50s, the journalist David Halberstam cited Harley Earl, a designer from Hollywood who had built a career custom making cars for Hollywood celebrities. Before the GM, CEO Alfred P. Sloan hired him to start an art and color department. Other sources credit Sloan himself. In any case, the problem that GM had on their hands in the era of the steady was clear. The market for cars was now saturated. How can you get people to keep buying new versions of the product that they already have? The dynamic obsolescence was the solution that they came up with. Before the war, there had been a joke that anyone could afford to buy a Ford in any color he wanted as long as it was black. After the war, however, GM started making cars in many colors, releasing new versions of the popular models with minor changes to their size, shape, and outlines every year. Some colleagues and competitors denounced this strategy. Planned obsolescence, they sneered, but it worked. Hype around the GM cars created the idea that a man's ride was a key sign of his character. The look of your car was supposed to signal your personality and aspirations. Now we can still see that in terms of marketing today, how cars are marketed. For the steady who tried on relationships, dating performed a similar function. The shopping around that it involved no longer meant looking for one night's entertainment. Instead, dating became a bigger investment in someone who would define you over a long period of time. You could buy into a relationship even if you ultimately intended to trade it for a newer and better one. Now we have in the 2000s, now we have the term starter wife. Unfortunately, because this trend did not just stay at dating and it did not just stay at going steady. Now it has moved over into the marital covenant itself. So now you have people saying, this person was my starter wife. Okay? It was the promise of affluence that had made the spread of going steady possible. But an undercurrent of anxiety came with it. There was something slightly panicked about the eagerness of teenagers to throw themselves at one another. The Norman Rockwell years of soda fountains and high school dances were also an era when a huge proportion of Americans believed that their world was to end very soon. In the 1950s, the prominent psychiatrist Robert Lay Lifton wrote that a silent stress disorder was afflicting the entire country. He called it nuclear numbing. In 1950, 53% of Americans believed that there was a good or fair chance that their community would be bombed during the next World War. By 1956, two-thirds of those believed in that event, that the Russians would ultimately use an H-bomb against the United States. Sound familiar? By consuming clothes and loves, Americans of all ages attempted to compensate for these feelings of insecurity about the environment and the disaster that a nuclear age could possibly create. Families afraid of being nuked walled their houses with consumer goods as if they were bomb shelters. So the fear that was created because of nuclear war was actually good for the economy. Sounds familiar? All right. So as this fear was being stoked, people began to go out and buy more goods because they were trying to stock up for the bombing that never happened. Their children watched them and learned from them. Teens who could now afford movie tickets, cokes, and hamburgers did not want to die alone on doomsday. Even if you would not go steady for good, it felt good to have a steady person in your life, especially now that it might turn out to be the closest you could get to forever. Anyone would want someone to do it with at their side right before the bomb dropped. So, this panic that nuclear threats created caused people to buy into two things. It caused them to buy into this concept of going steady, even if it was not permanent, and it also caused them to buy into consumerism. Today, we are in fact living at the end of the world order that the golden age of going steady created, if not the world itself. Our end times feel less dramatic than the nuclear blasts that the steadies feared. Average temperatures are climbing, ice caps are melting, the rich grow richer while everyone else grows poorer around them, all down with the long slide into what economists call secular stagnation. In an age when so much feels precarious, serial monogamists cling to their partners for comfort. But in our version of the apocalypse, it seems less clear what going steady is for. No bomb failed, and everyone did it anyway. Whatever is coming now, how is it that we hope the people we love might protect us? The post-war dream of a detached house, a happy housewife, and a full-time working husband was feasible only for a brief window of history. Even then, it was feasible only for a limited segment of the population. Since wages stagnated in the late 1970s, working class families of the Ozzie and Harriet type have collapsed under the strain. Cohabiting relationships without marriage and single parent households have since become a norm. The cultural conservatives who call for a revival of the family, as if there has ever been any one kind of family, ignore the fact that the choices many people make about marriage are not just cultural or moral. Good morning. They are also influenced by money. Studies show that many members of the working classes feel they simply cannot afford to marry. Either they cannot afford the wedding, or they cannot afford other markers of adulthood that feel like prerequisites for marriage, such as paying off student loans, buying a house, etc. Many of those who give marriage a go learn the hard way that living hounded by financial worries with no end in sight is not the greatest beginning for a marriage. More and more evidence suggests that today marriage has become a privilege of the middle class. In the United States, the middle class is shrinking quickly. Since the 2008 financial crisis, even college educated people have faced falling wages, waning job security, and a lack of benefits. Increasingly, we have no choice but to resort to part time work, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs to make up a 40-hour work week, and contract work or independent contracting. The dream of settling down forever or of anything being steady forever is fast fading. For more and more people, the future feels impossible to predict. Young people today are told that if they want to stand a chance, they must be mobile. We must be ready to move across the country in order to take a job or move in with family members after we lose a job. We should chase promotions and freelance gigs wherever we can. Professional pressures often force people to make tough choices regarding their relationships. With the possibility of a break looming constantly on the horizon, it can be difficult to feel sure enough about someone to commit. Why? Because you're living in an unsteady economy. And with that unsteadiness of economy or that unsteadiness of job security, people feel less likely to commit. All right? Because if you're saying, I want to wait until I'm established in my career and have my credit in order and am able to buy a home, you're looking at a possibly a longer wait time to do that, hence not wanting to commit right away. All right? So, again, as the writer is telling you here, it's not just a cultural or moral thing that people are looking at, it's also financial. In a world of uncertain prospects, having a partner can be a source of joy and support, not unlike that of having a steady. To be part of a couple can provide a sense of security and companionship, even if we know it's probably not for good. To have someone who cares for us for now feels stabilizing. It creates a small oasis. Despite the many gains that women have made since the 1950s, the double standards that punish us for acting on our sexual desires still exist. If you are a woman who has been raised to believe in standards, serial monogamy may seem like an attractive compromise. An urban legend says that if a woman hopes to marry, as the vast majority of all young Americans still do, she must not let her number, her lifetime tally of partners, get too high. All right? As a teenage virgin, the writer says, I remember reading in a well-worn magazine that the outer limit had been statistically proved to be 5. In 2011, Anna Faris rom-com What's Your Number put it at 20. If you become sexually active around 17, as the average American woman does, and do not marry until nearly 30, as she also does, you either have to spend long dry spells abstinent or go steady if you want to stay within your bounds. What's Your Number had a happy ending. After a misguided quest to reconnect with each of the 20 men she believed she had slept with in order to convince one of them to marry her, the goofy girl played by Anna Faris ended up falling in love. By the end, she seems to be headed into happily ever after with Mr. 21. But in the final scene, she and her new beau receive a surprise answering machine message from one of the men she had been counting. To fans, the voice of Jay from Club Med Turquoise immediately gives him away as the comedian Aziz Ansari. Hey, Jay says, I got a weird message from your assistant, and I just wanted to let you know we never had sex. You did this awkward striptease involving maracas and then gave me a hand job. It was something like you do with your dry style. You vomited, you passed out in the shower. Anna Faris's character is elated in the movie. The one is her number 20 after all. What's your number? Got to have it both ways. Mostly, it poked fun at a piece of advice that is clearly absurd, but it also hinted at a rule that might hold true after all. It was like a Wizard of Oz about female sexual liberation. Like Dorothy, the heroine wakes up in a narrow, tidy bed that she thought she had lost forever. Her misadventures with men hovering around were just a dream. So, the world is going to tell you, hey, get all the partners you can. But if you live by a Christ standard, then you're going to want to maintain your integrity. You're going to want to maintain your purity. And that involves self-control and abstinence. All right? Just want to put that in there because this writer is not writing from a Christian perspective. Still, many people do take their numbers seriously. In 2014, researchers at the National Marriage Project reported that the more sexual partners a woman had before marriage, the more likely her marriage was to fail. Academic sociologists have pointed out myriad problems with this data, but the press widely reported it. Women who don't sleep around before their wedding have happier marriages, but men can play the field without worry, study finds. I had to read a few paragraphs to realize that this was intended as a joke. Because how many of us know that there are consequences to matching your body up spiritually with somebody who is not intended to be your partner for life? Despite the benefits of serial monogamy, members of many couples end up feeling entrapped or bored or taken for granted. Like Jeff and Marie, the studies of the RCA social hygiene video, you can become desperate to get out of something you are not sure how you got into. Which is why godly counsel is important. Some speak of the casual drift into premarital cohabitation that has become the norm among peers. The way Dorothy Dix wrote about going steady back in 1939, she said, "The custom has all the worst features of marriage and none of its advantages. They say the risk and long-term costs of such an arrangement will be borne disproportionately by women. Like girls who were expected to resist any urge they felt to give in to go all the way with their boyfriends, women who are serially monogamous today often hear that they must be careful. Experts say that it is our responsibility to manage how a relationship proceeds. Today, most authorities accept that women may want premarital sex. Not all men are presumed to be aggressors whose lust a good girl must parry. More often, popular culture seems to suspect them of being George Costanza-like man-children. At the same time, there is a consensus that men have all their lives ahead of them to fumble in relationship after relationship after relationship, whereas women do not. Women are assumed to have a limited window of time in which to find a partner before their attractiveness or their fertility begin to wane. According to this logic, the risk you take by drifting into serial monogamy has less to do with compromising your virtue than letting your value fall. Every day, the mother of a friend who has been living happily with a boyfriend sends her a text message. No ring on the finger, you must not linger. I know this mother, and she is not joking. My friend has just turned 26. This kind of threat assumes that a single woman in possession of good sense must be in want of a husband. It can go the other way too. A man wants to marry his girlfriend. She might want to continue exploring. I have known more than one couple that split for similar reasons. If one partner wants more and the other does not, heartbreak will follow. The greatest liability may be this: many times neither part of the couple is sure. There are plenty of reasons a person might not be interested in marrying. The studies may have already seen them. Popular culture during the era idealized family life, but it was an open secret that many husbands and housewives during that time were unhappy. Across the country, psychiatrists told patients that their discontent was a sickness. Churches swelled their numbers by assuring parishioners that they could pray away their boredom. But many children must have seen that their parents were suffering. In 1960, when the editors of Red Book magazine issued a call for letters from readers on the subject of why young mothers might feel trapped, they received 24,000 replies. Advice experts thought that studies were blindly ruining their marriage prospects. They might have simply been putting marriage off. Today, Americans seem to have an almost hysterical ambivalence about marriage. On the one hand, we spend obscene sums of money on weddings and episodes, binge watching of wedding related shows like Say Yes to the Dress. We accept laws that incentivize people to marry by offering tax breaks and tying access to health care, other benefits, and visitation rights to the institution of marriage. We celebrate the triumph of those who have gained same privileges. More than 80% of never married Americans still say that they do want to marry. Yet many of them live in ways incompatible with the institution of marriage. We work too long, we move too often, we may remain ambivalent about monogamy, staying with one partner forever, or about having children. Serial monogamy is a way of putting marriage off. Does it also call into question its place as a central value in our culture? With the apocalypse forestalled, the contemporary equivalent of going steady can easily turn into a recipe for indecision. We stay in relationships out of convenience long after our infatuation has passed, and now that marriage is no longer the obligatory conclusion of a serious relationship, we can feel comfortable merging lives with people we may not want to be with for life. We introduce them to our families, we go on vacations together, we learn everything about their friends and their jobs, and still remain unsure. We drift in and out of relationships. You claim you might not want to spend your lives together, but then you wake up 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line and realize you already have. Going steady. All right. Next week, we're going to pick up with chapter 6, which talks about freedom. Freedom. Anybody got any comments on that? Because that was a doozy. All right. We can take a look around us and see, especially even amongst celebrities, how many people have gone steady for years and years and years and years at a time, and then they finally get around to marriage. And they have the wedding, right? And at the wedding, you see their children who are the flower girl or the boy carrying the rings, and they have a whole family surrounding them. And some of us are thinking, man, I thought they were already married, but they weren't. They were just going steady. All right. And so those of you who are millennials who are contemplating marriage, she brought up some very good points about how our economy is actually playing a part into whether or not people are considering marriage. If you can't find a steady job, or your job makes you travel all the time, or you work crazy hours, all right? A lot of my millennial friends, some of them, especially if they're in the corporate side, they're working 12, 14, 16-hour days sometime, grinding at someone else's machine, all right? And they'll pay you a lot of good money to do that, but you're also forsaking family life, all right? And I've talked to some people who are my age, 40 and older, who did that when they were younger, and a lot of them have regrets because they realized that that corporate engine became their life. They became married to that. And so now they are dealing with things like maybe they feel like they're past the time to have children or conceive. So you have to think about that in terms of your future and what do you want out of your future. All right. Just something to think about, millennials. 11, indispensable relationships you can't be without. We're going to start. Who's your Timothy? I don't know if we're going to finish it today, but if not, we will continue it next week on Wednesday. Who's your Timothy? You need a protege. You need a protege. The writer here puts up this quote. He says, "We are all treading in someone else's footsteps. Believe it or not, no matter how genius you are, no matter how creative or original you believe you are, we are all treading in someone else's footsteps." I guarantee if you do some research, you will find at least one other person who has done something in history that you are considering doing in this generation. All right? An old African proverb tells about a band of elephants happily traversing the terrain when they suddenly came upon a raging river. The big elephants did not have a problem stepping into the rough, dangerous waters. However, the small young elephants in the group were afraid to take that first step. Elephants are known for never forgetting. As the big elephants were crossing over, one of the elephants in the middle of the river shouted to the front of the line to those who had already crossed over and said, "Brother leader, we have some folks still standing on the banks of the river who haven't made it into the water." Brother leader didn't call a town meeting or write a government grant or seek any congressional legislation. These lead elephants turned around, got back into the water, and stood shoulder to shoulder, allowing their bodies to create a dam that parted the waters to allow those little elephants and the more fearful adult elephants to cross over on dry ground. How many people who make it in life, who get to the other side, forget to remember? Or they refuse to take time to turn around, get back into the water, and help Timothy's cross over on to dry ground. My friends, this is the mark of great leaders. Great leaders don't just say, "Follow me," and stand on the other side and say, "I don't understand why you can't get into the water." Great leaders actually go back and lead people across. All right? You, however, know all about my teaching, my way of life, my purpose, faith, patience, love, endurance, persecutions, and sufferings. Paul's charge to Timothy. He didn't just show Timothy the good sides of leadership. He also allowed Timothy to see all the parts of leadership. How do people get disappointed when they become leaders? They get disappointed when the people they were following sheltered them from real persecutions, real sufferings, and real endurance. I know I'm not going to get any amens on that. But leaders, you are doing people who follow you a disservice when you do not express to them the sufferings, the persecution, and the endurance and the patience that goes along with your faith and love and hope. A Timothy is a protege, an heir, an apprentice, a younger, usually less mature version of yourself. Now, there are two ways that people tend to handle a person that they see that is a younger version of themselves. When I see someone who's a younger version of myself, I have two options. I can either recognize the younger version of myself and help that person not make the same mistakes that my younger self made and to be more successful than I was at their age in life or at their experience in life, Or I could do what Saul did, and I could see the future king coming, and then I could say, I'm going to do everything in my power to stop this person from progressing and maturing into the person that they need to be. Now, I don't need to give you examples of how many people do the latter rather than the former. But a Timothy or a protege is usually a less mature version of yourself. A Timothy is someone who knows your mind better than anyone almost ought to be allowed to know someone else's mind. The historical Timothy was a single parent son, probably about 16 when he was first called by Paul, my son, the same term of endearment Peter calls his protege, John Mark. Not every pupil inherits the mantle of their master. And if you look at what Paul says, Paul tells the people, follow me as I follow Christ. Why does Paul emphasize this? Because when we put on Christ's mantle is perfect. Christ's mantle is not flawed. So I'm not going to tell you, I want you to pick up my mantle. I'm going to tell you, I want you to pick up Christ's mantle. So follow me as I follow Christ. If you follow me as I follow Christ, you're going to continue to go into the path of perfection. But if you start following me, you might pick up some of my attitudes that are not godly. You might pick up some of my ways that need improvement. All right. So we're always supposed to be pointing people into following Christ and not our personalities. Okay. I'm going to leave that alone for now. Sometimes the cream of Peter and Paul turns out skimmed milk. But of whom can you say, my son or my daughter? Will you have any heirs? Who will inherit your work? Who will continue your legacy? Who will even have an heir, not of your possessions, but of your life and soul? Have you ever considered that your Sistine Chapel might not be a place, and it might not be a building, it might not be a project, but your Sistine Chapel, in other words, your greatest work on earth, might actually be what you instill in another person? My New Zealand friend Alan Jameson puts it like this in his book that comes close to a theology of journey as anything yet written. He says, like Abram, the question that we too must consider is whether we will have descendants, not children in our own line, but descendants in faith and in life. I can look back and I can name off the people whose faith and life inspired me to be the person that I am today. I learned some things about faith from the women in my family. I learned some things about faith from the very first female apostle I encountered when I was about 13 years old. I learned some things about faith from two of my former pastors when I was a young person. They taught me some things about faith, about love, about truth, about integrity, about believing in people. So I'm not a blood descendant of them, right? But I'm a descendant in faith and in life. So the question is, will we love and care for others in such a way that they become descendants of our faith and our life? People to whom, through the lessons of faith that we have learned, are passed on, and the riches of our experience of God's presence and God's absence is carried. Before Paul had a Timothy, get this, before he had a Timothy, he had to first be a Timothy. I know people forget that, but Paul was a protege himself. He was a protege of Gamaliel, the most important rabbi in Jerusalem during the time of Christ. Gamaliel was the grandson of Hillel, one of the greatest interpreters of the Torah in Hebrew history, as evidenced by the title bestowed on him of Rabboni, or our teacher, rather than Rabbi, my teacher. Even though Gamaliel recommended patience with those who claimed that Jesus was the Messiah, his star pupil Saul did not agree with him and set upon and stoned blasphemers. Before becoming an evangelizing Paul, Gamaliel's star pupil was a persecuting Saul. Have you ever noticed how Paul, whenever he begins a letter to the ecclesia, he pushes Timothy to the front and brings greetings from both of them? Consider the following examples. 2 Corinthians 1:1. Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, not by ordination, all right, not by a license, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother, to the ecclesia of God in Corinth, together with all the saints throughout Achaia. Philippians 1:1. Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus, to all the saints in Christ Jesus at Philippi, together with the overseers and deacons. Colossians 1:1. Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother. 1 Thessalonians 1:1. Paul, Silas, and Timothy, to the ecclesia of the Thessalonians in God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, grace and peace to you. 2 Thessalonians 1:1. Paul, Silas, and Timothy, to the ecclesia of the Thessalonians in God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. In the words of Reggie McNeil, Paul knew that ministry reproduction would be necessary for the movement to survive. And so what was Paul doing in each one of these instances, in every region that he was writing a letter to? Paul was not only writing to them, but he was also introducing the people that he was apprenticing under him to the regions. That's a whole other preached word. So that when they went into these regions, it wasn't like, Paul, I know, but who are you? Nobody did that to Timothy and Silas, because Paul honorably set the platform and introduced their names to the region and told people to receive them when they came to that region. I wish I had an organ right now. But how many people, how many leaders do not do that? All right? They don't do that. And so what happens is their proteges go to another region, and then they begin to experience warfare in a region that, had they been properly introduced to that region, they probably wouldn't have experienced that warfare. And that's all I got to say about that. Shunamitism versus Sharonism. The Bible references two Shunammite women, both unnamed. One provided hospitality for prophets and preachers, hence the tradition of Shunammite households, homes with sleeping quarters for preachers, also known as prophets' chambers. The other provided warmth and stimulation for an ailing king. This became known as Shunamitism, or the notion that old men were rejuvenated by being with young women, with the emphasis on closeness, not on commerce or sexuality. The name comes from the young girl Abishag of Shunem, who was brought to lie with the 70-year-old King David in a non-sexual embrace, because it was believed that the breath and moisture of someone younger is warmer and hence therapeutic than the colder breath of older people. I combine these two Shunammite traditions into one and call it Shunamitism, the cultivation of leadership by the old in the young through the hospitality of teaching, mentoring, and deploying. Teaching, mentoring, deploying. Teaching, mentoring, deploying. Teaching, mentoring, deploying. And I'm going to substitute the word mentoring because I know what it means. And I'm going to put in there apprenticing. Teaching, apprenticing, and then deploying. I want to teach you. I'm going to teach you. Then I'm going to apprentice you. That means I'm going to allow you to work with me and see what I do what I do, okay, with guidance. And then I'm going to deploy you. Shunamitism keeps the old young and gives age and wisdom to the youth. In my own life, the writer says, I tend to shut down, circle the wagons around what and who I know, and befriend the familiar. Fortunately, for 11 years, I was a Timothy to a Shunammite woman who was still making new friends and investing time, energy, and resources in new projects when she became a centenarian. Marie All was a gardener, philanthropist, and environmentalist who created in Dayton, Ohio, the largest learning center of the National Audubon Society. Well into her 80s when I first met her, Marie was still open to new ideas, new perspectives, and May-December friendships. She became such a Yoda to me that I paid tribute to her influence on my life by dedicating a book to her. Marie All took me on, as she put it, because, quote, you are so into books and creativity. You need to be introduced to God's creativity. In her upstairs loft, which served as a greenhouse, she offered me a protected space for writing and reading when the phones in the president's office would not stop ringing. When the words did not want to stop flowing, she would send meals up to me. She always insisted I took time out for an early morning or late afternoon walk in the garden. That's when she painstakingly introduced me to the outdoors, the world of night, the ways of a tree, the red cedar, and the sunset effect. She taught me to always look for the Timothys. A healthy tree is not a single tree, no matter how beautiful it may look. A healthy tree is a tree that has heirs. A sycamore community with trees in various stages of growth and development. Not only did you never plant one tree, but you fostered sycamores in various ages and stages. Always look for a tree's successors, she would say over and over again, before you judge its health and vitality. Not until she died did it hit me that our friendship had been a brilliant reflection of that Shunammite looking for heirs philosophy of life. So even just take what was just said there. All right? A tree, a single tree is not a healthy tree, no matter how beautiful it may look. If you want to judge the health of a tree, you should look for its heirs before you judge it as healthy and having vitality. So if I look around and I look at a ministry, for example, and that ministry only has one person under the main leader, I got to ask, is that a healthy tree? How many leaders are being raised up? Can I see the ages and stages of leaders being raised up? Or is it just one person or a relative that is the plan to take over after that person moves on or goes on to the next, transitions to the next place in life? All right. I'm going to stop here for today because I don't want to rush through this. I believe this is very important. So next week we'll be back completing this chapter of Who's Your Timothy? Who's your Timothy? Imagine yourself as being that tree today. Look around you. Do you have anybody that you are growing, that you are developing, that you are apprenticing? Is there anybody whose life that you're pouring into? Or are you just building your own brand? All right. So this has been our first episode of Daring Dialogue Season 4. And I have been your host. I want to thank you today for your time and attention. Remember, if you are new to the broadcast, the first 5 people that email me at reachshante@gmail.com and tell me, hey, I'm new to your broadcast, I have something for you. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out today and be light. Take care and God bless.